Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of the European Conservatives podcast, Brussels and Beyond, a podcast designed to keep you in the loop about the political wheelings and dealings that are happening here in Brussels and in the capitals of Europe. My name is Zoltán Kottas. NGOs from 8 EU member states have launched the European Citizens Initiative, asking the European Commission to pass legislation that would force countries with laws against abortion to pay for abortions in other EU countries. In the EU, abortion law falls strictly under national competence, meaning that Brussels cannot force any country to relax its restrictions. However, as the 9 NGOs from 8 EU countries behind organising the initiative claim, Brussels could theoretically give financial support to member states with more liberal laws, thereby facilitating abortions for women from other EU countries. According to the initiative's website, access to abortion is limited for over 20 million women in the EU, leading some to seek out the procedure in a different member state. The NGOs have 1 year to reach 1 million signatures from across the EU for the Commission to consider turning the proposal into law. But success does not guarantee legislation. The Commission is only required to consider a proposal once the threshold has been reached and can simply choose to discard it just as easily. Legal experts, however, are not all convinced of the soundness of the argument. They say the EU would directly be affecting the allocation of resources to healthcare, and that's explicitly not allowed under the EU treaties. EU affairs ministers are discussing a German proposal that, if voted into law, would tie the disbursement of EU funds to the implementation of rule of law reforms. There are already such rules in place, but the proposal says payments would be tied to implementing a set of minimum rule of law standards by default as a prerequisite for accessing all EU funds. The German plan says this type of financial conditionality, or in other words, financial blackmail, has proved to be the most effective incentive to make countries address their rule of law shortcomings. My colleague Tamás Orbán is here to explain the details. Tamás, what exactly is the proposal being discussed?
First of all, this is not an official proposal. This is what's called in Brussels lingo a non-paper, which is basically something to just consider as we move forward. So normally, until now, when you wanted to, let's say, punish a country for violating the rule of law, you had to be very specific. You could open a case for a very specific reason, then complete all sorts of bureaucratic requirements, which can take years. There's a lot of voting to get through, and then maybe in 2 or 3 years, maybe you can impose some kind of sanctions based on Article 7 on that country, like freezing certain EU funds. Freezing cohesion funds always needed very specific violations of the rule of law, which needed to be addressed to unfreeze those funds, right? But with the pandemic recovery funds, the EU also learned that maybe there is another way, because the recovery funds were designed in a way that they could be tied to certain minimum level of rule of law reforms that, if a country doesn't already have in its legislation, would need to meet in order to access the funds. So the idea is that in order to not have all these disputes, like what we've seen in the case of Hungary and Poland specifically, we should tie all the normal EU funds, all the normal cohesion funds, to minimum rule of law requirements by default. In slightly more direct terms, this means that what we've called, what these governments and a lot of conservative politicians have been calling ideological financial blackmail, this would cease to be just an instrument. This would be a default, a normal part of the whole EU system.
It would be institutionalized.
It would be institutionalized, yes.
And what chance is there of this new proposal to come into law or to be seriously discussed?
Well, this hasn't been proposed yet. And I don't really see any way that this would directly be accepted if it was ever proposed to the council. But there's another way that we need to consider, and that's the next multi-annual financial frameworks negotiations. So the current budgetary period is going to end in 2027. So between 2028 and 2035, there's going to be the next 7-year budget period, the next 7-year MFF. Last weekend, we started the first annual budget conference specifically designed to start brainstorming, basically, about the structure of the next EU budget. This was organized by the Commission, of course, and the Budget Commissioner Johannes Hahn, he proposed basically the same thing. He did not linger too much on the topic, but he mentioned that it's one of the things that is officially being considered by the current European Commission. Now, we also know that this commission is not going to last for long. It's going to be replaced by early fall at the latest. So another commission could have a very different opinion of the things. Also, the council is always being replaced. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the threat is not serious at the moment. But still, we need to keep an eye on this kind of development, because the trajectory is there.
Yes, and the trajectory is there for many other proposals and plans which infringe on nation states' rights and vetoes, for example. Scrapping of the member states' veto right is being discussed again. One of the German ministers talked about this not so long ago. Who talked about this?
Yes, you're right. It was the foreign minister, the Green foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock. She just recently published an essay, an opinion piece, to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of the 2004 EU enlargement. And of course, it was about how strategically important is to have a new wave of enlargement. And she also repeated what basically every mainstream EU politician has been saying for the past year, is that in order for the EU to remain functional, operational with 30 plus members, we also need to deepen it, to introduce reforms that make it way more centralized. So basically, EU countries will need to sacrifice some portion of their sovereignty for the common good, so that we could still make decisions together. Now, this is a very pretty way of saying that more power to the center, to Brussels, and to the big member states. Because what Baerbock is suggesting is to shift from unanimous voting in the council to qualified majority voting. Qualified majority voting needs more than half of the member states, representing 2/3 or 65% of the EU's total population. Now, this means that countries like Germany, who are nearly 20% of the entire EU population, are a lot more powerful when it comes to voting than small member states who represent less than 1% of the total population. Their vote simply carries way more weight. So when Baerbock says that we're all in this together, that it's okay and it's fair because we equally sacrifice a portion of our freedom and sovereignty, it's simply not true, because in that case it would just make Germany even more powerful relative to smaller countries.
Tomasz, thank you very much. Regarding so-called rule of law procedures, European Union commissioners approved plans to move ahead to terminate the 7-year-long rule of law vendetta against Poland, as my colleague Thomas O'Reilly reported a few days ago. According to a classified document, European Commission Vice President Vera Jourova will soon write to the European Council saying that the clear risk of a serious breach no longer exists regarding the rule of law in Poland. The European Commission initiated rule of law harassment in 2017 against the then Polish Law and Justice government over alleged conservative interference in the nation's judiciary. Subsequent legal wrangling resulted in billions of euros of EU funding being withheld from Warsaw. A change of government late last year produced a pro-EU coalition, resulting in a change of tune from Brussels, with the EU unlocking 137 billion euros in funding. Almost immediately after new Prime Minister Donald Tusk was sworn in, Poland has been in a political crisis as the new government jailed opposition lawmakers and even sent riot police to shut down the nation's national broadcaster. The rule of law breaches in these cases have not alarmed EU officials. According to documents exposed by the German media, climate experts and green activists manipulated and falsified data on the country's nuclear energy program in order to fast-track the shutting down of Germany's 3 remaining nuclear power plants. The secretive campaign occurred despite soaring energy prices in the aftermath of sanctions on Russian energy imports. My colleague Thomas O'Reilly is here to explain. Thomas, what exactly has German media exposed?
Well, these revelations came about on account of a court order in the German courts which released documents involving the German Green Ministry to a magazine named Cicero. As you alluded to earlier, the leaked memos or the released memos and documents point to what amounts to sort of a shadow government operating within the German state, primarily of green officials around German Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck, who successfully suppressed information around the closure of Germany's 3 remaining nuclear reactors last year. Germany, as you know, has had a long and very embedded anti-nuclear lobby. Indeed, that was where the German Green Party emerged in the 1980s. And in the past decades, since the Fukuyama disaster, they have been successfully rolling back the country's nuclear reactor grid. In 2011, for example, a quarter of German energy needs were met by nuclear energy. Last year, the 3 remaining reactors, primarily in Bavaria and the east of the country, were shut down. In essence, what these memos reveal is that Robert Habeck and other officials successfully ignored and even played up fears about the sort of longevity of these relatively old nuclear reactors. And this has essentially contributed to the current energy crisis that Germany faces.
Has there been an uproar in Germany, and could there be an investigation into this matter?
Yes, this has only worsened the current German left's coalition issues. As you likely know, Germany is governed by the infamous Rainbow Coalition of the left, centre and Greens. This is being seen as yet another disaster entirely self-induced by the German elite. The Green Minister himself, at the centre of this controversy, was previously dragged over the coals last year for alleged internal nepotism involving both his family and best man, where senior state positions and lobbying positions were in essence handed to figures close to him and his Green Party. This controversy has been leapt on, not just by the insurgent AfD, but by the conservative opposition, the CDU. You've seen Robert Habeck, the Green Minister, brought in before the Bundestag Energy Committee to explain his actions. He has said there was no attempt to pull strings on the closure of the remaining nuclear reactors, that it was based on science and not ideology. But nevertheless, there are calls to launch an official parliamentary investigation into the figures behind the closure of the remaining nuclear reactors.
You mentioned that nuclear power plants once provided 25% of the energy in Germany. What's the situation now that all of these plants have been shut down? How have these impacted Germany's energy crisis and economy?
Yes. Well, as you listeners likely know, Germany has been caught between a rock and a hard place, between an overly zealous green energy policy that is heavily dependent on raw materials from Asia. Indeed, some of these raw materials are being stuck in the Red Sea amid the recent crises, as well as energy sanctions against Russia. We've seen notable spikes in energy prices the past 12 to 18 months. We have seen calls from many industrial officials warning that the country's entire industrial base, operational in many companies that have been operational in many instances since the 19th century, is in jeopardy. And we have seen the increased use of coal power, specifically lignite, a very type of CO2 emitting coal, as well as American LNG imports. But yes, it's while there does appear to be a sort of a slim majority against nuclear power, though not a majority. A majority of Germans favour extending the life of those now closed reactors. This is just another crisis and will no doubt add to sort of the current populist tenure in Germany at the moment.
Thomas, thank you very much. More than 1,000 people participated in an Islamist rally in the German city of Hamburg, with organisers saying they wanted to raise their voice against Islamophobia. However, slogans calling Germany a dictatorship of values rang out, accompanied by Allahu Akbar, God is great, being chanted in unison. Most disturbingly, at least one placard read, "A caliphate is the solution." The demonstration's organisers are closely associated with the confirmed extremist movement Muslim Interactive. Federal Interior Minister Nancy Faeser said it was hard to bear such a demonstration. This lackluster response has prompted calls from centre-right and right-wing parties for her immediate resignation. Opposition centre-right party, CDU, said it is scandalous that hate demonstrators are taking to the streets in Hamburg in favour of a caliphate. The constitutional state must finally defend itself and show strength, they said. Spokesman Alexander Trom said anyone who agitates against Germany as an alleged dictatorship of values and calls for a caliphate has no place here and must leave the country as quickly as possible. Anti-globalist party AfD said while the interior minister focuses exclusively on the so-called fight against the right, Islamist groups dream of revolution. Such propaganda events, calling for dictatorship and terror, are not only a disgrace, but above all, a danger for Germany. Even the United Arab Emirates ambassador to Germany denounced the demonstration, saying he found it unbelievable, unacceptable, and incomprehensible that people who found a home in Germany are turning against Germany. Austrian prosecutors are investigating the leader of the anti-globalist right-wing party FPÖ, Herbert Kickl, on suspicion of using public funds to pay for adverts in return for alleged favourable media coverage. The adverts were allegedly commissioned by Kickl and other members of his party when Kickl was the interior minister in a government consisting of the FPÖ and the centre-right People's Party between 2017 and 2019. The accusations come at a time when the FPÖ has been leading opinion polls for the past year and a half, with European elections coming up in June and national elections set to be held in the autumn. The party, which is campaigning on a hard anti-immigration platform, could receive as much as 30% of the votes, its largest share so far. The party maintains that the advertising contracts had been awarded objectively, and the sole purpose of the investigation was to harm the FPÖ. The owner and editor of the tabloid, which received lucrative adverts, also said there had been no collusion with the FPÖ. The UK Parliament recently adopted Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's long-awaited Rwanda plan, meaning migrants who entered the country illegally can be sent to the African country of Rwanda, where they would have their asylum claims processed. However, thousands of migrants who are supposed to be deported from Britain have gone missing, according to media reports. Of the 5,700 people identified for removal, only 2,100 continue to report to the Home Office and be located for detention, meaning the Home Office is essentially in contact with just 38% of those it intends to send to Rwanda. Health Secretary Victoria Atkins said that law enforcement officials would use a variety of measures to find people, adding that illegal migrants will be found and they will be removed. After years of legal wrangling over the Rwanda plan, one failed asylum seeker has finally left the UK for Rwanda, but not under Rishi Sunak's Rwanda Act. Instead, the migrant left voluntarily and was paid to do so. The unnamed individual left the UK on a commercial flight on Monday after being paid around £3,000 to relocate. According to media reports in Sweden, 30 police officers have been found to be providing classified information to gangsters. There have been over 500 instances of Swedish police personnel briefing gang members about ongoing investigations, upcoming raids, or competing gangs. The information they provided resulted in several attacks on enemy gang members, including at least 4 murders. In many cases, the gang members used quite unconventional methods to obtain the information, such as starting sexual relationships with strategically selected female police officers. One example is Elin, who met her gangster boyfriend through a dating app when she was still a cadet. She regularly fed him classified information she obtained through illegal searches over the course of 4 years until she was caught. The revelations led to at least 30 police officers being sacked or forced to resign for being labelled security risks. The scandal has grown to such an extent in a matter of days that even the Swedish Prime Minister was forced to comment on it. Ulf Kristersson said the report contained very concerning information, although, without an official investigation, he couldn't say whether the phenomenon constituted a threat to national security. Sweden has long been grappling with criminal gangs, primarily coming from migrant backgrounds. Crime rates, including rape and murder, have skyrocketed in the country in recent years, leading to an increased public demand to limit immigration. Tom van Grieken, the leader of the Vlaams Belang Party, a nationalist, anti-globalist, anti-immigration party which strives for Flemish independence from Belgium, says independence will be on the negotiating table if right-wing forces win regional elections in Flanders in June. In his interview for the European Conservative, Tom van Grieken said Flemish people represent 60% of Belgium's population, pay 70% of the taxes, provide 80% of all exports. In other words, they finance the country, yet socialist, communist and green federal governments rule the country. Vlaams Belang is expected to be the strongest party following June's elections, receiving 26 to 27% of the votes, while the pro-independence conservative New Flemish Alliance is projected to finish second with 21 to 22%. If the election results reflect the opinion polls, Tom van Grieken believes there will be an opportunity to end what he calls the Belgian construction and put independence on the agenda. Of the European elections, which are being held on the same day as Belgian elections, the party leader says it's important for right-wing patriotic nationalist parties to gain as many seats as possible in the European Parliament and to put pressure on the European Commission in order to change the course of Europe. But Van Grieken believes national elections are even more important because the European Council is the key decision-making body where nationalist leaders should jointly oppose the globalist agenda. To read the interview in full, go to europeanconservative.com. Ireland has become, in effect, an authoritarian one-ideology state enforced by a media-controlled government and devoid of serious parliamentary opposition, writes Irish writer Sean Brothnack in a commentary for the European Conservative. He complains that the uniformity between government opposition, government-organised non-governmental organisations and mainstream media provide no checks and balances, which is essential in a democracy. The political consensus has come about because the two largest political parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, have, at leadership level, adopted left-wing positions on every issue. Together with opposition parties Sinn Féin, Labour and the Social Democrats, this liberal bloc supports permissiveness, multinational corporations, the European Union, mass immigration and hate speech laws. The mainstream parties do not represent or even purport to represent the Irish people, but rather the interests of NGOs, multinational corporations, the EU and the US government. Decisions are therefore done to, rather than on behalf of, the Irish people, writes the author. Expressions of opposition from the public are ignored and will now be suppressed by means of the new hate speech bill, which will criminalise the expression of facts or opinions with which the government disagrees. The law will, based on a list of protected characteristics, criminalise inciting hatred against persons or groups. If a person possesses material that is deemed likely to incite violence or hatred, they will be presumed to be in breach of the law unless they can prove their innocence. As Shay Gombrownak assesses, and I quote, "The Irish political and media establishment are so self-absorbed and self-entitled that they demonize any right-wing government that is elected anywhere in the West as being authoritarian and unacceptable, while priding themselves on how progressive they are." To read this insightful commentary, check out our website. And that concludes this episode of Brussels and Beyond. Don't forget to read our magazine, check out our website, subscribe to our Twitter, Facebook and YouTube channels, and watch our monthly TV show, Inside Brussels. Hope you tune in again next week. Have a very good week. Bye bye.